Good evening, and welcome to your zone. Join us tonight, as we listen to this beautiful story, drawn from the book of Judges, in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. As you begin to listen to this visualization story, give yourself permission to be carried away. Give yourself permission to visualize and to fully immerse yourself into the story. To enjoy this moment as you fall asleep tonight. So whenever you're ready, I invite you to make yourself comfortable. Take a long deep breath. And if possible, you may gently close your eyes, and let's begin. This is the condensed story of Samson, a Nazarite man with tremendous strength, and his beautiful Philistine lover, Delilah. During the Philistines' rule, there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was infertile, so she'd borne no children. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman, and said to her, "Behold, you're infertile now, and have borne no children. But you shall conceive, and give birth to a son. But you must be careful not to drink wine, nor any strong drink. And do not eat anything unclean, for you're about to have a son. No razor shall be used upon your son's head, because from birth the boy shall belong to God, and in future he'll begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines." So the woman had a son, and named him Samson. One day, Samson went down to Timnah, and there he saw a Philistine woman. And when he came back, he said to his parents, "I saw a Philistine woman in Timnah, and I'll like you to get her for me as a wife." But his parents said to him, "Is there no woman in your own tribe, or amongst all our own people, that you intend to marry from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson replied, "Get her for me, father, for she suits me." And so Samson went with his father and mother to Timnah. And just as they came to the vineyards of Timnah, behold, a young lion came out, roaring toward him. The Spirit of God came upon Samson mightily, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the beast in two, as if it were a young goat. But he didn't tell his father and mother what he'd done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she suited him. When he returned after a while to marry her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion he'd slain. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the dead lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, eating it as he went, and giving some of it to his father and mother. And just like before, he didn't tell them he'd extracted the honey from the carcass of the lion. Then, as was traditionally done by the bridegrooms, Samson went down to the woman, and threw a feast in her honor. When the Philistines saw him, they sent 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, Let me now tell you a riddle. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen robes, and 30 changes of clothes. But if on the other hand you're unable to tell me, then you'll give me 30 linen robes, and 30 changes of clothes. They said to him, Tell us the riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. For 3 days, no one could solve the riddle. So the men said to Samson's bride, Go now and tease your husband. Entice him until he tells you the answer. Otherwise we will destroy you, and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? So Samson's bride wept before him, saying, You don't love me. How can you ask a riddle to the sons of my people without telling me the answer? Samson replied, Behold, I haven't told it to my father nor to my mother. So how can I tell it to you? But she continued weeping before him for as long as the feast lasted. And on the 7th day Samson was forced to tell it to her. And behold, she revealed it to her people. Before sunset on that day, the men of the city came to Samson and said to him, What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found out the answer to my riddle. Then the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men. He then collected their spoil, and gave the changes of clothes to those who had answered the riddle. But he was very angry and returned to his father's house. And so his bride was rather given to one of his companions at the feast who had been his best man. After a while, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat as a present. But when he said, Let me go into the inner room to be with my wife, her father will not let him go in, remarking, I really thought you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your best man. But is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Take her then instead. But Samson replied, This time, I shall be blameless in regards to the Philistines when I do them harm. So he went and caught 300 foxes, turned them tail to tail, and put a torch between every pair of tails. And after setting all the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the harvested piles of grain of the Philistines, burning up not only the standing grain, but the olive orchards as well. The Philistines wondered, Who has done this? And the reply was, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because his bride was given to his best man. Furious, the Philistines went and burnt her and her father. So Samson said, Since you act like this, I will not stop until I've had my full revenge on you. He fought fiercely and slaughtered many of them. And when he was done, he went down, and stayed at a cavern in the cliff of Etam. Then the Philistines came up and camped in Judah, eventually carrying out a raid on Lehi. And the Jedi said, Why have you come up against us? They replied, We've come up to bind Samson. to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to meet Samson at the cavern in the cliff of Etam, and said to him, "Do you not know that the Philistines are our rulers? What are you doing to us?" He replied, "I've done to them as they did to me." They said to him, "We've come down here to bind you, and to turn you over to the Philistines." Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you'll not attack me yourselves." They said to him, "No, we'll simply bind you securely and deliver you to them. And surely we'll not attack or kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the cliff. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him. Then the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, such that the ropes on his arms became as burnt flax, and the bonds melted from his hands. And he found the fresh jawbone of a donkey, which he grabbed, and used it to kill 1,000 men. Then Samson remarked, "With the jawbone of a donkey, I've piled them, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I've killed 1,000 warriors." After a while, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, and her name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines came and said to her, "Go and tease him. Entice him and find out for us how it is that his strength is so great, and how we may overpower him, bind him, and torture him. Then each of us will reward you with 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me the secret to your great strength, and how you might be bound to torture you." Samson replied, "If they should bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I'll become weak, just like any other man." So the lords of the Philistines brought to her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. The men were all waiting in the inner room. But when she said, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you," Samson snapped the cords, like a string of tow snaps when it touches fire. So they didn't find out the secret of his strength. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have deceived me and lied to me. Now please tell me how you may be bound." He said to her, "If they bind me tightly with new ropes which have never been used, then I'll become weak, just like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them. Then she said to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." The men were all waiting in the inner room. But Samson snapped the ropes from his hands like thread. Again Delilah said to Samson, "So far you've deceived me and lied to me. Please tell me now with what you can be bound." He said to her, "If you should weave the 7 braids of my hair with the web and fasten it with a weaving pin, then I'll become weak, just like any other man." So while he was asleep, she took the 7 braids of his hair and wove it with the web, fastened it with a weaving pin and said to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin of the loom and the web. Then she said to him, How can you say I love you when you don't trust me? You've deceived me 3 times already, and you've still not told me the secret to your great strength." And she continued pressing him, and urging him daily until eventually he was wearied to death. So he told her all he knew. "Ever since I was born I've belonged to God, and a razor has never touched my head. If I were to be shaved, all my strength will leave me, and I'll become weak, just like any other man." When Delilah saw that he'd told her all that he knew, he called for the lords of the Philistines and said, "Come at once, for he has told me all that he knows." And so the lords of the Philistines came up to her, bringing the money with them. And after she'd put Samson to sleep on her knees, she called for a man and had him shave off the 7 braids on Samson's head. And then she began to tease him, and his strength had left him. Then she called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Samson awoke from his slumber, thinking to himself, "I'll get up as I've done at other times and shake myself free." For he didn't know that God had left him. The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze chains, and made him a grinder in the prison. However, Samson's hair began to grow again. Then the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon, as they rejoiced, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands." And when the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has laid low our enemy, the one who destroyed our country, the one who killed many of us." When they were in high spirits, they requested, "Go and get Samson that he may amuse us." So they called for Samson from the prison, and made him stand between the pillars of the house, as he entertained them. Then Samson said to the young man who held his hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now, the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. Plus about 3,000 men and women were on the roof looking on while Samson amused them. Then Samson called on God, "O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me just this one time. O God, that I may by one act be able to avenge myself on the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes." Then Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house rested, and leaned himself against them, one with his right hand, and the other with his left. And he said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bent over with all of his strength. And the house fell over on the lords, and crumbled upon all the people who were in it. So the people he killed at his death were more than those he'd killed during his lifetime. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him away, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of Manoah, his father. The end.